Hey, what's up, guys? It's Bakes, and thank you for joining me for this episode of my random horror reviews. It feels like it has been a little while since I last did an episode in this series, so excited to get into today's movie, which is one I was actually excited to give a rewatch to as well. It wasn't a first time watch. I was actually interested to see what my thoughts would be this time round. And also considering Saw X is coming out pretty soon, I thought perfect time for a rewatch. Today's movie is from 2021 and it is titled Spiral from the Book of Saw. This movie stars Chris Rock, Samuel L. Jackson. It's one of the more high budget, well made cinematic installments in the Saw franchise. So let's get into the plot for this one. So in this film, it is a copycat jigsaw killer, considering by this point in the franchise, John Kramer is dead. And he is targeting in specific corrupt police officers. And we have our lead in this movie, played by Chris Rock, Detective Zeke Banks. And he's sort of leading this investigation, and he hasn't really got anyone else watching his back because he was actually one of the officers to call out the rest of the department for being corrupt. So he's sort of leading it alone almost. He's got a rookie accompanying him, and yeah, they just basically got to figure out who this copycat jigsaw killer is. So gonna leave the plot there for this one, and let's get into my thoughts of 2021's Spiral. So with Spiral being the ninth installment in the Saw franchise, as I said before, this movie feels the most cinematic and high budget installment in the franchise yet. And I found that to be a really welcome change, and a lot of people are going to be like, well, yeah, duh. But what I mean by that is I feel like a lot of people kind of like the later installments and how they feel grimy, and you can sort of sense the limitations of their budget, and it sort of has a charm about it. But yeah, I found it to be really welcome change up in this one. I was kind of caught off guard with how much color and how bright this movie actually is. As I said, a lot of the Saw franchise feels really dark and dirty. This movie's bright and it uses lots of colors. The cinematography is pretty good. As I said, pretty welcome changes. Staying on the topic of changes, a lot of people were divided with some of the choices that they made in this movie to, change up the pig mask, for example. The new voice for the killer, they scrapped Billy the puppet and changed it for this pig puppet. If you're going to go with a story like this one where it's a copycat killer and, you're sort of putting a fresh face on the franchise, you might as well make those changes, and for the most part, I feel like they work pretty well. I also really liked the investigation angle in this movie. I mean, the first three Saw movies kind of have this whole detective investigation thing going for it, but later on it just sort of turns into focusing on the traps. But in this one, it sort of flips back to the investigation, and I kind of like how the killer's throwing riddles in there, riddles to hint who the next victim's going to be or how to get out of a trap. I liked that investigation detective angle going in this movie. Another big talking point for this movie was Chris Rock as our lead and his performance. It was very divided with a lot of people, and I'd probably say majority of people leaning on the side of saying that he gave a bad performance here. And I can see what they mean, because there's parts in this movie where he needs to be serious and he needs to convey that he's scared or angry or even intimidating. But to me, there's parts where it almost comes across as sarcastically funny. And as I said, I'm just speaking for myself here, but I'm not watching it like, oh my god, he's butchering this performance. I actually kind of think he does a good job. It's kind of what you expect. Chris Rock is a stand-up comedian turned actor. So he's just naturally funny and naturally charismatic. But I kind of like it. As I said, I feel like he does a good job. And he's funny, and to stay on the point of the humor, this movie is genuinely funny. There are parts where just two characters are talking, and it should be a pretty serious setup, but you end up laughing, and I really do enjoy that. And as I said, a lot of that time, it's because of Chris Rock. Samuel L. Jackson also has some pretty funny one-liners. Again, it's a nice change for the Saw franchise. A lot of it is played quite serious, and as I said, the traps are thrown at the forefront of the franchise. But as I said, with this different take, I like the humor thrown in there. It's not too distracting. It's actually quite enjoyable for myself. So I like Chris Rock's performance in there. Yes, I understand sometimes he doesn't fully convey the emotions that he probably should be doing, but I enjoy it. It's fresh. It's something different. So moving on and getting into a few of my negatives, where I want to start is one of the weakest parts to me of this movie is the story. And that's really disappointing because I genuinely like the setup for this one. As I said before, it's unrelated to John Kramer. It's a copycat killer, a fresh take on the franchise. Someone who's targeting these corrupt cops. I actually like that setup. But as I said, the story and the angles and the way it's executed, it's almost too simple. You know, you can sort of guess the next scene before it happens. It's very run by the numbers. Another small tweak on the story is the amount of corruption in this department. I almost found it distracting because it was almost like a little too unrealistic. Like, every cop, besides Zeke, pretty much, is corrupt. And not just like a little bit. They've done like some fucked up shit. And it's almost like, how has no one overseen or, you know, taken this department down in the past? It's like almost too much. As I said, it's like almost distracting. And the weakest part of this story I'm going to get into now a little bit is the twist and the reveal of who the killer is. As I said, I've seen this movie before. From the first time I saw it in cinemas, about halfway through the film, I went, I think it's this guy. But I started to second guess myself because it was almost too obvious. I'm like, no, it can't be, because like that's the obvious answer. And then by the end, I couldn't really think of anyone else. So I'm like, I'm going to stick with this guy. And I was right. Like, the killer reveal is that obvious. Like, I'm sorry, if you couldn't see the twist coming, like, you need to just breathe and fucking rewatch this movie, because it is that obvious. So much so, I'm going to get into spoilers at the end of this review, so once I give my rating, stick around if you want to know spoilers of who the killer is and how I was able to guess it. But again, that's one of the easily weakest parts of this movie, the reveal of who the killer is. As I said, overall, the story is like really bland and weak and run by the numbers in this movie. I know that Chris Rock had a big hand in sort of the story in this one, and I'm sure he wasn't just doing it alone. He would have had other people helping him. And I can see his passion in this movie because there's a lot of callbacks to earlier installments in the franchise and earlier traps, and you know, even if there's change-ups like new puppets and all that, you know, he's referencing things earlier. You can tell that the people who made this movie really care about the franchise, but as I said, the execution, it's just sloppy. Yeah, the story in this one is definitely the weakest part. Now, getting into the topic I'm sure most people were waiting on, my thoughts of the traps. And to cut straight to the chase, the traps in this movie are nothing really special. I don't think, like, overall they're that great. But there is one trap that I really like, but I'll get to that a little bit later on. But yeah, overall, the traps are nothing special. By all means, they're not the worst traps that we've seen in the whole franchise or nothing. They're just kind of forgettable and bland, and there's nothing really in this movie besides that one, as I said, that you're going to think back on and go, oh wow, that was, you know, something special. They're all just kind of bland. But another weird thing about the traps in this movie is the scenes of the people in the traps and the end results are almost kind of out of order. There are parts in this movie where they come across the victim's body, but then go back to what happened in the trap. It's like, why are we watching the trap if we know what the end result is? Like, why show us that the victim has died and then go back and show us the trap? It's like, it's weird ordering. It's like, why would you do that? Another thing about the traps that I thought were kind of weird is majority of the traps obviously have an option where you die or survive. That's the whole thing about the traps. But a lot of them don't work in the plot if the character survives. So, like, they have to die. So, again, it sort of takes away the stakes, you know. This, as I said, he's targeting police officers, so a cop's in a trap. And it's like, if he survives, you know, it's not really going to throw a spanner in the works that much. He needs to die. And again, as I said, it sort of takes a lot of weight off the traps. But I will get to that great trap now. The best trap in this movie is the final one. I think most people call it the marionette trap. Yeah, I think that's really good. As I said, it's the last trap in the movie. It's actually very grand and it's super impactful and well done. And it actually does end the movie on quite a high point. It sort of leaves your jaw on the floor. It's like, wow, that was a really good trap. But take away that one, all of them are kind of bland. As I said, the ordering of the results and the people in it is weird. And as I said, I feel like, you know, if the characters survived, which, you know, you feel like most of the time they're not, as I said, it sort of makes you think, like, it would be weird if they survived. It wouldn't actually help the plot. So the traps in this one, overall, not great. So to sum up my thoughts of this movie, overall, Spiral is just kind of fine. As I said, I really like the setup of this movie and the idea, this copycat killer who is targeting these corrupt police officers, and it's sort of a fresh take on the story while also having some things that we know, from the earlier installments in the franchise. It's nothing totally out of the ballpark, but it's something where you don't need to have seen the first 8 movies. I kind of like the setup, but as I said, the story fails. As I said, the reveal of who the killer is, which as I said I'll get to after my rating, so stick around if you are happy with spoilers. That execution is really weak. As I said, I could tell who the killer was halfway through the movie. The traps are overall nothing special. As I said, there's one exception, but overall nothing special. The story is just kind of a bit clunky. As I said, you can tell that a lot of people cared in this movie and were trying to make a good movie, and there's lots of callbacks, and as I said, I like Chris Rock's performance. I like majority of performances in this movie. I find it to be quite funny. I love the cinematography, the colours, but unfortunately it's just one of those things where the execution just doesn't quite hit. There's small attentions to detail, they keep bringing up this heat wave in the city, and it just really sets the atmosphere. I like that, but as I said, I'm just going to sum it up. The execution isn't great. By the end of it, as I said, this movie's just kind of fine, but when a movie's fine, as I said, it doesn't really leave you thinking back on it, and it just kind of leaves you a little bit underwhelmed and makes you think the film's a little bit forgettable. So to sum up my rating, I'm going to give Spiral from the Book of Saw from 2021 6.5. That's roughly what I would have rated it the first time I saw it in cinemas, so my opinion on it hasn't really changed. I was hoping to enjoy it a little bit more, but overall, as I said, decent setup but poor execution. Now I'm going to get into my spoilers here, so if you don't want this movie spoiled for you, leave now. If you've seen the movie and you're happy to talk about it, stick around. The reveal of who the killer is being the rookie, I forget his name, but the rookie is revealed to be the killer. I saw that coming from the time that the killer died. So if you don't know, or you need a refresher, they come across a body, the rookie's not there, and then they come to the conclusion that that's the rookie's body. You never see his trap. As in, you see the body, and as I said before, there's parts in this movie where they show the results and then go back to the trap, so I'm like, oh, maybe they're going to get back around to it. They never do. And I'm like, why do they not show the rookie's trap? And then I'm like, he must be the killer then. And I just sort of came to that conclusion, but I'm like, no, that's too obvious. And the lead up to the rookie dying just sort of comes out of nowhere. There's no build up, where with other characters who do get put in traps, there's sort of a build up, they go to a place they're not meant to be or something like that. His death just kind of comes out of nowhere, and I say death in quotations because he's not actually dead. And then Zeke says, he's going to go visit his family to, send his condolences, and he does that with a character earlier in the movie, but then he never does. It just sort of gets forgotten about. So, as I said, it's just way too obvious who the killer is in this movie, and that really is super annoying because it's kind of fun to have these twists in the Saw films and figure out who the killer is. But as I said, as soon as we see the rookie's trap, I knew it was going to be him. So there we go, guys. Thank you for sticking around if you did stick to this part. Let me know what you thought of the twist if you saw it coming. As I said, I just found it to be really obvious, and not to shit on people who didn't see it coming, but come on, guys, what the fuck? Like, it was the most obvious thing in the whole movie. But thank you for joining me for this review, guys, and I'll see you for another video soon. Peace.